everyone, me again. I'm here to explain the critical reading method from the PSAT. What I'd like to do is go through some of the strategies and how to take notes for this passage or passages in particular to make it easier for you to get through the passages without having to memorize everything and feel like you have to scan all the information before you answer the questions. So let's start with the types of reading passages that you'll encounter. Generally, the first passage is literature. So I'm working out of order here, but the literature passage can be taken from anything. From Jane Austen, we're going to read a piece of Emma, to anything that could be for more modern times. Usually the voice is somewhere late 1700s to early 20th century. So that's sort of the types of literature passages that I've encountered over the, let's say, 12 tests that have been released by College Board total. The next component would be women's history and American history or government. It's often this juxtaposition of men wanting to maintain a patriarchal society and women sort of expressing and explaining why they should have rights. So if you see a man versus woman sort of 17, 18, early 1900s, you usually know that that's the issue. The ladies want the rights and the guys are saying, you can't control it yet. So there's sort of this push and pull between the two passages. They often wind up being the compare and contrast passages. The next component would be social science, humanities, and economics. They all seem to go together. There are a lot of questions about sort of transit and society and how cars function in our cities and traffic and non-genetically modified foods and economics passages of how people spend money and sort of spending habits. And then we have natural science. I have read a lot of passages about DNA, a lot of passages about genetic modification. These are the types of passages that you'll come across here, sometimes about space. And if you're ever feeling like you're lacking in a particular area, one good way to sort of supplement some of the reading is to read The Week. It compiles a lot of the best news media in our country and around the world into a very easy magazine to read. But there's a particular page that basically focuses on government, politics, social science, humanities, natural science. And so if you can start to learn how these writers write, it makes it a lot easier to unpack what they have in the passages. Of course, then we have our compare and contrast passages. And my advice there is that you always read passage 1 and then answer any of the questions about passage 1 first. You'll notice that they'll go in order. And then read passage 2 and answer the questions about passage 2 and then compare and contrast those two passages. Just makes it easier to retain and understand the information. So the reading method is really a 4-step process. The first step is that I ask you to read the intro to the passage before anything else. And a lot of students will say, well, why? They just jump right into the passage. Well, it's really important because you want to establish who wrote the passage through tone, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and time period. All of these factors shape the way that people converse with one another and the way that they try to portray their characters in the passage. So practice test number 1 in the SAT book, it's this passage about a woman named Chi and her daughter Naomi, and they're members of the House of Fuji, a noble family in Japan in the year 1920. So if you understand who's in control of Japan in 1920, it's an emperor. There's a lot of tradition about anything surrounding sort of the ruling class families. You can understand sort of why the passage goes the way that it goes for practice test 1, passage 1. Here tonight, we are going to read about Emma. It's a Jane Austen novel, originally published in 1815. Again, here we are talking about a British author conveying sort of a female's thought process in the early 1800s. So in my mind, I imagine big dresses with petticoats and sort of a bonnet and horse and carriage and low, beautiful stone walls in the English countryside. So these pictures in your mind really shape how you're able to jump into the passage and understand and unpack the passage. So I mentioned in the previous video that we don't really want to focus on the questions first. Of course, the questions are really important. You have to answer the questions and read them carefully, but the passages are what drive the question. So if you really understand the content and you're able to unpack it, it makes it a lot easier. And reading the intro is that first step, because it's like turning the lights on in a darkened room and you don't know who's at the surprise party. So if you read it, you kind of have a little inkling of who's going to be there and sort of how the story is going to unfold. The second step is that you want to organize the passage into manageable pieces. Brains can remember only so much content, so help your brain out. Don't exhaust it right away. You want to break it into chunks of 5, 10, 15 lines at a time, depending on the content. For the Jane Austen novel, I could probably handle about 10 or 12 lines of this without sort of spacing out, especially tired and reading a lot of content all day. I know you guys are, it's a lot to do, especially if you're going to sit down and do a PSAT, but I would personally mark it off, and you'll see what I'm going to do with the pointer here in a couple of minutes. So I would break the passage and tell your brain, I'm going to stop here and write a main idea note. So as soon as you're done reading the intro, mark off your passage into manageable pieces, and then that's how you're going to attack it. If it's literature, you read so much fiction that you probably can handle about 10 or 15 lines. But if it's anything else, like really technical science, 5 lines, maybe 1 line at a time. It just depends on sort of what they're talking about and if you've had any prior experience. So part 2. So now let's assume that you've organized your passage into manageable pieces, and now it's time to read each segment and take notes. So you're going to read a segment and annotate, and you're going to write down main ideas, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 words to summarize what's been going on. When it's a character development, I often circle the character's name and then summarize what has happened in the margin, so then I can write down who had what reaction. I can keep it straight. I do have a note here saying that underlining only helps the eyes track back over the content, whereas note-taking will help the brain critically think and make inferences. So be careful. Try not to become a chronic underliner, because that's just going to rehash how the brain is reading the information on the page. What I want to see is that shift to the critical thinking, the main idea, the inference component of your brain. Be sure to hone in on character development, key ideas, and other information that helps progress. That progresses the conversation, like that keeps it moving forward. Read and annotate everything before answering any of the questions. So you really want to know the content before you jump into the questions. So that leads us to the questions. How do we answer the questions? You want to read the questions carefully. No skimming or skipping. Don't let your eyes track over information. Rephrase the question. Often the SAT will throw confusing words like the word characterize. We all take that as a character analysis, and it's not. It just means to describe. So every time you see characterize, cross it out, write describes. Every time you see the author contend, cross it out, write argues. Every time you see the word function, it means purpose. So rephrase the question, make it easier for you to understand and answer. And the third step here is going to be the most important thing I tell you in any of the videos. It's to think of an answer and write it down before looking at the choices. This means you're putting yourself in control of the process rather than the test controlling you. So make sure you write something down, a word, a symbol, a phrase, something to capture your thought, because your short-term memory will start to fade once you get to letter C and you read the answer, and then you're going to start the debate. Oh, maybe it's A, maybe it's C. If you write down your answer before looking at the choices, that's going to capture what you think it should be, and then you have something to always compare it to. And finally, process of elimination. What you want to do is cross out the word or phrase that makes a statement false, not A, B, C, or D, because that's not going to prove to you why something's wrong. So if you cross off the word or phrase that makes a statement false, it makes it a lot easier. So reading fallacies. So this is the standardized exam. Essentially, all the reading questions fall into 1 to 6 categories. So why read the question ahead? If you practice reading a section or two, you'll get the hang of the types of questions the test maker asks. So focus on the content and then go to the questions at the end. When in doubt, do not answer a question. The new SAT does not penalize for answering questions, so it's wise to always put an answer down in the new exam. So that was a fallacy. When in doubt, do not answer a question. So now you might as well answer everything, right? Because why not try to go for the point? It's 1 out of 4 chance of getting it right. Your reading method takes me a long time. I want to go back to skimming. I hear this often. Anything new takes a while to get the hang of. Practice the method. It's like throwing a ball. I was not very good at throwing a softball. I probably hit the catcher and the umpire more times than I ever want to think of, but throwing it over and over and over again, you get more accurate going over the plate. I really shouldn't be talking about softball. I was more of a kickball pitcher, but you get my point. So try it on your next lit assignment or history assignment. Try this reading method and see how by breaking it down by paragraph and page can really help you absorb the content. So practice that annotating skill. What I like to do is to leave a 4x6 card for every chapter when I'm reading a book. So say a novel, pretend it's a Great Gatsby. And after every chapter, I write down main idea notes, key quotes, character development, and then let's say the chapters are only named chapter 1, 2, or 3. So I would say chapter 1, Nick Carraway moves to Long Island to, Little Egg, I think, right? Or East Egg, right? So that's what I would say. So if you can then capture all of that at the end of reading a novel, if you have all those 4x6 cards, now you have your chapter review. Now you have your notes for your outline for your essay. So if you're efficient when you're working, it makes all of that sort of synthesizing the content easier in the end. So let's try passage. So this is the first passage in your practice test booklet. This is the Jane Austen passage. I'm just going to grab a little stylus here. So I'm going to grab a pen. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to break up the passage at the natural conclusion of a sentence. So you can see that I'm just breaking it down. So what I would do is just look for natural ends to paragraphs or sentences. Oftentimes back then you can see right here that we have semicolons. They also serve as a conclusion of a sentence, so beware. And so what I'm just trying to do is just break it up just to make it easier. So I'll give you a couple of ideas of how to approach this passage. So this passage is adapted from Jane Austen, Emma, originally published in 1815. So I'm going to read the first part all the way up until this break in the paragraph. And then I'm going to tell you my main idea note. Unfortunately, this is not the best way for me able to write notes, so I'm just going to tell you what my note would be for this segment. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and a happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. Must be nice, right? She was the youngest of the 2 daughters of a most affectionate, indulgent father, and had, in consequence of her sister's marriage, been mistress of his house from a very early period. So in the margin here, I'm going to write down, has lived a comfortable life, which is, really kind of polite because it sounds like she's pretty well-to-do and doesn't really have a care in the world. But in the margin, I would just write, lived a comfortable life. Especially because they say they had very little to distress or vex her, right? There's like little things that have come and gone, but there's little to bother her. Her mother had died too long ago for her to have more than an indistinct remembrance of her caresses, and her place had been supplied by an excellent woman as governess, who had fallen little short of a mother in affection. 16 years had Miss Taylor been in Mr. Woodhouse's family, less as a governess than a friend, very fond of both daughters, but particularly of Emma. So in this space, I would write down Emma's mother passed, and Miss Taylor, like I would circle Miss Taylor's name, and then I would write governess or caretaker if you did not know what a governess was. Between them, it was more the intimacy of sisters. Even before Miss Taylor had ceased to hold the nominal office of governess, the mildness of her temper had hardly allowed her to impose any restraint, and the shadow of authority being now long passed away, they had been living together as friend and friend, very mutually attached, and Emma doing just what she liked, highly esteeming Miss Taylor's judgment, but directed chiefly by her own. I would write MT plus Emma friends, Emma independent. So maybe circle her name and write down independent. She sounds like she's kind of like an unbridled horse. She just kind of does what she needs to do for herself and doesn't really take anybody account other than herself. The real evils, indeed, of Emma's situation were the power of having rather too much her own way, and a disposition to think a little too well of herself. These were the disadvantages which threatened to alloy to her many enjoyments. The danger, however, was at present so unperceived that they did not by any means rank as misfortunes with her. So I would say, again, very independent, sort of loose reins from her family. Sorrow came, a gentle sorrow, but not at all in the shape of any disagreeable consciousness. Miss Taylor married. It was Miss Taylor's loss which first brought grief. Okay, so look, Miss Taylor didn't die. Miss Taylor just moved out. So this brought Emma like a great deal of sadness. So Emma's sad, Miss Taylor married. It was on the wedding day of this beloved friend that Emma first sat in mournful thought of any continuance. The wedding over and the bride people gone, her father and herself were left to dine together, with no prospect of a third to cheer a long evening. Her father composed himself to sleep after dinner, as usual, and she had then only to sit and think of what she had lost. Alone. So basically, Miss Taylor moved out. Dad sounds like he always goes to bed after dinner. It seems kind of like a dud. And there's Emma sort of sitting at the table by herself. It's not like they had TV in 1815. The event had every promise of happiness for her friend. Mr. Weston was a man of unexceptionable character, easy fortune, suitable age, and pleasant manners. And there was some satisfaction considering with what self-denying, generous friendship she had always wished and promoted the match. But it was a black morning's work for her. The want of Miss Taylor would be felt every hour of every day. She recalled her past kindness, the affection of 16 years, how she had taught and how she had played with her from 5 years old, how she had devoted all her powers to attach and amuse her in health, and how nursed her through the various illnesses of childhood. So it sounds like Miss Taylor was the mother that Emma never had. And so she's going to miss all these things and all this time that they spent together. So I'm just going to skip a second because I know there's some questions we can answer thus far. So you can keep reading and annotating, of course. So the main purpose of the passage. So I would always answer these questions when I'm finished reading. And of course, hopefully you take a second, maybe pause me, finish reading, and then we can come to this question together. So the main purpose of the passage is to think of the main idea. And the main idea for me is that there's a significant change in a character's life. And I'm not looking at the answer choices. This is what I would write down if I were able to write it down on the screen. But there's a significant change. And it's not the death of her mother, it's the loss of her friend because she moved out and got married. So let's look. So if I'm taking the test, I would take my hand and cover over the answer choices. Of course, write my answer down, and then look at them one at a time. So the first one says, describe a main character and a significant change in her life. Oh my gosh. I promise you, I did not read that before I said that. So it's kind of funny. So that one sounds really good, doesn't it? Okay, we're going to leave that. So I would put a check mark. Provide an overview of a family and a nearby neighbor. Well, that seems like she was a foreigner before, and she's not. She's somebody who was very close to the family. So I would get rid of this nearby neighbor. Oh, golly, sorry. Here we go. So we're going to get rid of this. Discuss some regrettable personality flaws in a main character. Well, for a second, they're not that regrettable. She's a little independent. Parents would probably be annoyed that she's so independent, but it's 1800s. What kind of trouble is she going to get into? So it's not really that. Regrettable personality flaws. That's not the main idea of the passage. Explain the relationship between a main character and her father. Well, look, we read through almost 2/3 of the passage. He hasn't really come in other than he went to sleep after dinner. So I would say that is not really, a part of it either. So my best answer would be A. Okay, so which choice best summarizes the first 2 paragraphs of the passage? So the first 2 paragraphs, if you remember, we're going to go back here. It's talking about sort of Emma having these best blessings of her existence. She was the youngest of 2 daughters. She lost her mom at a young age, and this governess came to live with her. So if I were to write my answer down, I would say, lost her mom at a young age, but was raised in a happy home. That's sort of what my best answer would be. So even though a character loses a parent at an early age, she's happily raised in a loving home. What is it tonight? So again, not a bad answer. So I put a check next to that one. An affectionate governess helps a character to overcome the loss of her mother despite the indifference of her father. Well, her dad's not indifferent. And it's not like the governess was really helping because the Emma was so young when it happened. So A is significantly a better answer than B currently. Largely as a result of her father's wealth and affection, the character leads a contented life. Yes, but again, that's not just the best of the first two paragraphs. We're introducing when Miss Taylor comes to live with her to sort of like guide her into this next phase of her life. So it's a little bit too limiting. A character has a generally comfortable and fulfilling life, but then she must recover from losing her mother. Well, that's the cart after the horse, or before the horse. It's in the wrong order there. So our best answer, again, is A. The narrator indicates that the particular nature of Emma's upbringing resulted in her being very independent, right? So I would write down independent. So she's not despondent. She's not sort of like lackluster and unresponsive. And she's not, well, I mean, sort of when Miss Taylor leaves, it sounds a little like she's friendless, but that's not her nature. Her nature is the fact that she's so independent. She's so wildly, opinionated. So I would say self-satisfied. So B would be my best answer here. And then, of course, we would go back and find out where the support is coming from to support question number 3. So I think you guys are getting the idea of how to approach these questions, what to get rid of when it's not the answer, and how to move forward. There are additional questions, of course, that take you all the way through question number 9, and that's sort of the standard type of questions here for the critical reading. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to go through any critical reading that you have for the PSAT or any SAT. And we're going to move on to the next video. Thank you.